Welcome to True Horror Stories Film. My name is Jonathan. I had been grateful if you'd settle in and watch this video before you get too cozy. Tonight, we explore what happens when curiosity meets tragedy, when amateur investigators disturb something that should have remained buried. Before we begin, these are atmospheric horror stories. Horror that crawls under your skin and lingers. So if you enjoy content like this, consider subscribing. It helps me bring you more stories like this. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what is the current time there. Now, let me tell you about a group of paranormal enthusiasts and the night they discovered that some legends have teeth. This happened in the fall of 2018. Just outside a small town in rural Tennessee. I am sharing this story because it was posted anonymously on several paranormal investigation forums, and the details, the specific disturbing details, are what make it impossible to dismiss. My name is irrelevant now. What matters is what we saw, what we experienced, and the warning I need to pass along to anyone who thinks ghost hunting is entertainment. I used to be part of an amateur paranormal investigation group. We called ourselves the Night Walkers, which in retrospect sounds embarrassingly dramatic, but we were serious about what we did. We had equipment, protocols, and a genuine desire to document evidence of life after death. We had heard about Oakville Elementary School for years. Everyone in the county knew the stories. The school had closed in 1973, officially due to declining enrollment, but the local legend told a different story. According to the tale, a 12-year-old boy had been bullied mercilessly by older students. The story went that they cornered him in the boiler room one winter afternoon, and things went too far. The boy died, and his body was allegedly hidden beneath the floorboards in that same boiler room. The school closed a year later, and no one ever confirmed whether the legend had any truth to it. That should have been our first clue to leave it alone. We arrived at the school just after sunset on a Friday in October. There were 4 of us that night. Marcus was our team leader, a high school history teacher who approached investigations with methodical precision. Sarah handled the technical equipment and had a background in audio engineering. Devin was our skeptic, always looking for rational explanations, and I was the researcher, the one who dug through historical records and local archives before we ever stepped foot in a location. The school itself was a single-story brick building with boarded windows and a rusting chain-link fence surrounding the property. Graffiti covered parts of the exterior walls, and the asphalt parking lot had split open in places, with weeds pushing through the cracks. The front doors had been chained shut years ago, but we knew from our research that the back entrance near the old cafeteria had a broken lock. The air inside was thick, stale. It smelled like mildew and decay, that particular odor of abandonment that sticks in your throat. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing scattered papers, overturned desks, and water damage that had turned the ceiling tiles into sagging, moldy masses. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and more graffiti layer upon layer of it, some dating back decades. We found the boiler room in the basement. The metal door stood partially open, and beyond it was a cramped, rectangular space filled with the rusted remains of the old heating system. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, and the floor was concrete, cracked in multiple places. Marcus made a joke. Something tasteless about asking the spirit if he was home. Sarah laughed nervously. Devin was already scanning the room with his EMF detector, looking for electromagnetic anomalies. I felt uncomfortable, but I could not articulate why. There was something about the boiler room that felt wrong, heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on us. We set up our equipment. Sarah positioned 2 digital recorders for EVP sessions. Electronic voice phenomenon recordings that might capture sounds beyond normal human hearing. Marcus placed a spirit box on an overturned crate, the device that rapidly scans radio frequencies to create white noise, theoretically allowing spirits to manipulate the sound and form words. Devin set up a camera on a tripod to record the entire session. I took notes, documenting the time, temperature, and baseline readings. Then Marcus began the session. He asked standard questions. Is anyone here with us? Can you tell us your name? Did something happen to you in this room? For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Just the sound of our breathing, the hiss of the spirit box, and the occasional creak of the building settling. Then faintly, through the spirit box, we heard something that sounded like a word. Home. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Marcus repeated his question. Is this your home? Another word came through, clearer this time. Mind. Devin was checking his EMF detector. The readings were spiking, jumping from baseline to the red zone and back again. He looked genuinely confused, because there was no electrical source in the room to explain it. The power had been shut off to the building in 1974. That was when we heard the noise from upstairs. A loud bang, like a door slamming, followed by what sounded like footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing through the hallway above us. Marcus made the decision to investigate. We left the equipment running in the boiler room and climbed the stairs back to the main floor. Our flashlights swept across the hallway, illuminating rows of rusted lockers and classroom doors hanging open at odd angles. The footsteps had stopped. The building was silent again, but the silence felt different now, charged, expectant. We moved slowly down the hallway, checking each classroom as we passed. Most were empty, stripped of anything valuable decades ago. But, in one room, we found something strange. A desk had been moved to the center of the room. Just one desk, positioned perfectly in the middle of the floor, as if someone had carefully placed it there. The chair was pulled out slightly, angled toward the door, toward us. On top of the desk sat a small, child-sized shoe, covered in dust. None of us touched it. Sarah took photographs while Devin checked for any sign of recent human activity. Footprints in the dust, disturbed debris, anything that would indicate someone else had been in the building recently. There was nothing. The dust on the floor was undisturbed except for our own tracks. We continued to the gymnasium. It was massive, dark, with a ceiling that stretched up into shadows our flashlights could not penetrate. The floor was warped and buckled in places, and broken basketball hoops hung at odd angles from the walls. Marcus wanted to try using dowsing rods here, simple L-shaped metal rods that supposedly react to spiritual energy. He held the rods loosely in his hands, letting them point straight ahead, and asked if there was anyone present who wanted to communicate. The rods immediately began to move, crossing over each other, then swinging wide apart, then crossing again. Marcus was not moving his hands. I was watching him closely, and I could see the confusion on his face, because the rods were moving with force, with purpose, as if someone was controlling them. Then both rods began to vibrate violently, shaking in his hands so hard he almost dropped them. At the exact same moment, the double doors at the far end of the gymnasium slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot. All four of us spun toward the sound. Sarah was already backing toward the exit, her flashlight beam shaking. Devin was trying to rationalize it, talking about air pressure and drafts, but his voice had gone high and thin. I saw it first. In the corner of the gymnasium, near the old stage where school assemblies would have been held, there was something standing in the shadows. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, with a shape that was wrong, disproportionate. The silhouette had a vaguely humanoid form, but the proportions were distorted, the limbs too long, the torso too narrow. Then it stepped forward, just one step, into the edge of Marcus's flashlight beam. I cannot adequately describe what I saw. I have tried, in the years since, to find words that capture it, but language fails. It had the shape of a man, but it was not a man. The skin, if it was skin, was gray and mottled, stretched too tight over bones that jutted at unnatural angles. Its face, dear God, its face had a smile, but the smile was too wide, extending far beyond where a human mouth should end, revealing rows of teeth that were too long and too sharp. And above that terrible smile, it had horns, curved and dark, rising from its skull like the horns of a ram. But it was the eyes that I will never forget. They were black, completely black, no whites, no iris, just empty voids that somehow still conveyed intelligence, awareness, and something that felt like hunger. Marcus dropped the dowsing rods. The metal clattered against the gymnasium floor, and the sound seemed to break whatever spell had frozen us in place. Sarah screamed. Devin grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the exit. Marcus was already running. We fled. There is no other word for it. We ran through the hallways, our flashlights bouncing wildly, illuminating glimpses of walls and lockers and open doorways. Behind us, we could hear it. Not footsteps, but something else. A sound like scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the floor, moving impossibly fast. The hallway seemed longer than it should have been. The exit, the door we had entered through, seemed to recede with every step. Then Devin, who was in front, suddenly fell. The floor beneath him had given way, rotten boards and weakened supports finally collapsing under his weight. He dropped through up to his waist, his legs dangling into darkness, his hands scrabbling for purchase on the edges of the hole. Marcus and I grabbed him, pulling him up and out. His leg was bleeding, scraped badly, but he could still run. We did not look back. We could not look back. Because we could still hear it behind us, closer now, and with the scraping sound came something else. Screaming. High-pitched, agonized screaming that echoed through the building, dozens of voices screaming in unison, children's voices. We burst through the back door and into the night air. We did not stop running until we reached our cars, did not stop until we were inside with the doors locked and the engines running. Only then did we look back at the school. It stood silent in the darkness, just an old, abandoned building. But in one of the upper windows, I swear I saw movement, a shadow passing behind broken glass. We left our equipment behind. Everything. The cameras, the recorders, the spirit box, all of it was still in that boiler room. None of us have ever gone back for it. None of us ever will. After that night, I did what I should have done before we ever entered that school. I researched. I spent weeks in the county archives, digging through old newspapers and records, looking for anything that could explain what we had experienced. I found something. A newspaper clipping from the Pine Ridge Gazette, dated November 17th, 1961. The article was brief, barely a few paragraphs, but it detailed the disappearance of a 12-year-old boy named Thomas Clay. He was last seen walking home from Oakvale Elementary School. His family reported he had been complaining of severe bullying in the weeks prior to his disappearance. The county sheriff searched the school grounds and the surrounding woods. The article quotes the sheriff as saying, "We searched everywhere. There is no sign of the boy. It is like the earth swallowed him up." The case was never solved. Thomas Clay was never found. There was more. In the comments section of an online forum dedicated to local history, I found a post from someone claiming to be a relative of Thomas Clay. They wrote that their grandmother always believed the older boys at Oakvale had done something to Thomas and hidden what they had done. The post mentioned that the school had done repair work in the boiler room during the summer of 1961, tearing up and replacing the concrete floor. The timeline matched. Thomas disappeared in the fall of 1961. The floor repairs happened the following summer. And according to the local legend, his body was hidden beneath the floorboards in the boiler room. But that does not explain what we saw. It does not explain the entity in the gymnasium, the thing with horns, and that horrific smile. I looked further, trying to find any connection, any explanation that made sense. And then I found something else, something that made me question everything. I came across an urban exploration forum post from 2015, 3 years before our investigation. A user named Static Walker had documented his team's exploration of an abandoned building, not the school, but an old asylum about 40 miles from Oakville. He described experiencing intense paranoia, shared hallucinations, and auditory disturbances. But months after his original post, someone else had commented, claiming to be an HVAC engineer. They suggested that the experiences matched symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning, combined with exposure to infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below the range of human hearing, that can cause feelings of dread, visual hallucinations, and even physical sensations like pressure on the chest. The engineer had written, "Your EVPs were likely tinnitus and auditory hallucinations." The building was not haunted. It was just slowly killing you. I read that comment over and over because it meant there might be a rational explanation for at least some of what we experienced. The old heating system in the boiler room could have been creating infrasound. There could have been gas leaks, mold spores, environmental factors that triggered our fear responses and caused us to see things that were not really there. But that explanation only accounts for the fear, the unease, maybe even some of the sounds and initial visual disturbances. It does not explain the dowsing rods moving with such force that Marcus nearly dropped them. It does not explain the doors slamming on their own. It does not explain the desk moved to the center of that classroom, positioned so deliberately, with a child's shoe placed on top. And it certainly does not explain what all 4 of us saw standing in that gymnasium. We saw the same thing, at the same time, in the same location. We saw something that was not human, something that had form and substance, and that terrible, impossible smile. I have spent years trying to reconcile these 2 explanations. The scientific one, that suggests the building itself was dangerous, toxic, creating the conditions for mass hallucination and paranormal misperception. And the supernatural one, that suggests we encountered something genuinely malevolent, something tied to the tragedy of Thomas Clay, something that has been waiting in that school for over half a century. The truth, I think, is that both things can be true at once. Maybe the building was killing us slowly with its decay, its gas leaks, and mold and infrasound vibrations. Maybe our fear was amplified by environmental factors we did not understand. But maybe, just maybe, something else was there too. Something that fed on that fear, that used our vulnerability to manifest, to show itself, to make us understand that we were not welcome. Thomas Clay disappeared in 1961. His body was never found. The school closed in 1973, 12 years after his disappearance, and has stood abandoned ever since. Every few years, someone breaks in, explores, posts about it online. Some report strange experiences. Most report nothing at all. But I believe Thomas is still there. And I believe he is not alone. Whether what we saw was his spirit, twisted by decades of isolation and rage, or something else entirely, something that claimed that building as its own territory, I do not know. What I do know is that we were warned. We were told, through the spirit box, that it was home, that it was mine. And we ignored that warning. We mocked it. We treated it like a game, like entertainment, and we paid the price for our arrogance. Devin still has nightmares. Sarah moved out of state and refuses to talk about that night. Marcus quit paranormal investigation entirely and got rid of all his equipment. As for me, I cannot walk past an abandoned building without feeling a spike of anxiety, without remembering that smile, that terrible, too wide smile. There are places in this world where the past does not rest quietly. There are places where tragedy leaves a mark, a stain that soaks into the walls and floor and air, and in those places, the living are intruders. We thought we were investigators, researchers seeking truth. But we were just children playing in a graveyard, and we woke something that should have been left undisturbed. If you are reading this, if you are someone who investigates the paranormal, who enters abandoned buildings looking for ghosts and spirits and evidence of life after death, I am begging you to reconsider. Test for environmental hazards. Bring carbon monoxide detectors. Be aware that your fear might be chemically induced, that your experiences might have rational explanations. But also understand that sometimes the scientific explanation is not the complete explanation. Sometimes both things are true. The building might be poisoning you, and something might be watching you from the shadows. We never went back for our equipment. The batteries have long since died. The cameras have stopped recording. But I think about those devices sometimes, sitting in the dark of that boiler room, surrounded by rust and decay and whatever else might be down there. And I wonder what they would show if we were brave enough or foolish enough to retrieve them. I wonder what was captured on those recordings during the hours after we fled, when we were gone and the school was empty again, except for whatever calls it home. I do not want to know. I truly do not. Because some answers are worse than living with the question. Some truths are better left in the dark, beneath the floorboards, where they have been buried for over 60 years. The school still stands. It will probably stand for decades more, slowly crumbling, slowly being reclaimed by nature. And maybe that is for the best. Maybe some places should be allowed to decay, to collapse in on themselves, to become unmarked ruins that no one remembers or visits. Thomas Clay was 12 years old when he disappeared. If he is still there, in some form, in some way, then he has been trapped in that building for over 6 decades. Alone. Forgotten. And whatever he has become in that time, whether it is still him or something else wearing his tragedy like a mask, it is not something anyone should encounter. I am done with paranormal investigation. I am done with abandoned buildings and ghost stories and seeking evidence of the afterlife. Because I found that evidence, and it was not comforting. It was not a gentle spirit seeking to communicate or find peace. It was rage and hunger, and something fundamentally wrong, something that violated every instinct that tells us when we are in the presence of danger. They say trust your gut. I did not. None of us did. We felt the wrongness in that boiler room, felt the weight of the air and the oppressive atmosphere, and we ignored it. We pushed forward, driven by curiosity and the desire to capture something on film, to prove to ourselves and others that ghosts were real. We proved it. And I wish we had not. I wish we had turned around the moment we stepped through that back door, the moment we smelled the decay and felt that heaviness pressing down on us. I wish we had listened to the part of our brains that was screaming at us to leave. But we did not. And now I carry that night with me, every day, every time I close my eyes and see that figure standing in the gymnasium. See that smile stretching impossibly wide. See those black, empty eyes watching us with something that felt like recognition, like it had been waiting for us specifically, like it had known we were coming. If you ever find yourself standing outside an abandoned building, feeling that pull of curiosity, that desire to explore and document and prove something to yourself, I want you to remember this story. Remember that some places are abandoned for good reasons. Remember that tragedy does not always fade with time, that some wounds never heal, and that the dead do not always rest peacefully. And remember that the most terrifying thing is not that ghosts might be real. The most terrifying thing is that we might be right about what happens to us after death. That we might linger, trapped and alone, in the place where we died, unable to leave, unable to find peace, slowly becoming something else, something angry and twisted and desperate for any contact, any acknowledgement, any chance to be seen again. Thomas Clay has been missing for over 60 years. His case is still open. His family is likely all gone now. No one is looking for him anymore. No one except the occasional urban explorer or paranormal investigator who breaks into that school and wanders through its dark hallways, not knowing they are walking over his grave, not knowing they are trespassing in his home. I cannot save Thomas Clay. I cannot give him peace or justice or closure. But I can tell his story. I can warn others away. I can make sure that his tragedy and what it created is not forgotten. The demon in the abandoned school is real. Whether it is Thomas, or something that attached itself to his death, or a manifestation of collective guilt and horror that has taken on a life of its own, I do not know. But it is there, waiting in the darkness, waiting for the next group of curious investigators to walk through that broken door. Do not be those people. Do not make the mistake we made. Leave the abandoned places abandoned. Let the dead rest, or rage or haunt on their own terms. They do not need our cameras and our equipment and our questions. They do not need us disturbing their space, mocking their suffering, treating their tragedy like a game. We are the living. We belong in the light. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. I still see it sometimes, in my dreams. Standing in that corner, impossibly tall, impossibly wrong, with that smile that was not really a smile at all. And when I wake up, gasping and sweating, the first thing I do is check that my bedroom door is closed, that the windows are locked, that I am safe in my own home, far away from that school and whatever still resides there. But I know, deep down, that distance does not matter, because it saw us. It looked right at us, with those empty black eyes, and in that moment, I felt recognized. I felt known, and I cannot shake the feeling that it is still aware of me somehow, still watching me from across the miles and years, waiting to see if I will ever be foolish enough to return. I will not, but I cannot stop others from making that same mistake. All I can do is share this story and hope that someone reads it, someone who was planning to visit that school, someone who thought it might be fun to explore an abandoned building, and that person decides to turn around, to stay away, to leave the darkness undisturbed. Because the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at night, is not what we saw. It is what we did not see. It is the question of what else might be in that building, in the shadows we did not illuminate, in the rooms we did not enter, in the spaces beneath the floors and behind the walls where 50 years of decay and tragedy have had time to grow into something no one should ever encounter. Oakvale Elementary School closed in 1973. It has been abandoned for over 50 years. And in all that time, in all those silent decades, something has been waiting there. Something patient. Something hungry. Something that finally has a name to go with its legend. Thomas Clay. The boy who disappeared. The boy who was never found. The boy who, if the legend is true, never really left at all. They say his body is buried beneath the boiler room floor. But I think Thomas is everywhere in that building now. In the walls. In the shadows. In the heavy air that presses down on anyone who dares to enter. And I think he is angry. Angry at the boys who hurt him. Angry at the school that failed to protect him. Angry at being forgotten, at being reduced to a local legend, a ghost story told to scare children. We were not children. We were adults who should have known better. And we learned, in the most terrifying way possible, that some legends are real. Some ghost stories are true. And some places are haunted, truly haunted by something far worse than death. Do not go to Oakvale Elementary School. Do not investigate it. Do not enter it. Let it stand. Let it decay. Let it collapse in on itself and disappear from memory. Because inside those walls, something is waiting. And it has been waiting for a very, very long time. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is the story of the night I stopped believing ghost hunting was safe, or fun, or anything other than a dangerous intrusion into spaces where the living do not belong. The demon in the abandoned school is real. Thomas Clay is real. And if you go looking for them, they will find you. I promise you that. They will find you. And you will understand, in that moment of recognition, that you have made a terrible mistake. A mistake you might not survive. Tonight, we explore what happens when the safe space you call home becomes a prison of questions you cannot answer. Now, let me tell you about Michael Chen and the rental house that broke him. I am a 32-year-old software engineer who works remotely. I have always preferred living alone, appreciated the quiet, the control over my own space. But what happened to me in the fall of 2019 made me realize that some houses should never have tenants. Some basements should stay locked. The house I rented in Millbrook, a small town in upstate New York, was exactly what I needed. Affordable, quiet neighborhood, 3 bedrooms that I barely used. The landlord, David Harmon, was a retired contractor in his 60s, polite enough during the walkthrough. He mentioned the basement had some water damage from the previous tenant, said I should avoid going down there unless absolutely necessary. The door stuck sometimes, he explained. Old house problems. I did not think much of it at the time. The first month passed without incident. I worked, I cooked, I maintained my routine. The basement door remained closed. I had no reason to open it. My washer and dryer were on the main floor, and I am not the type to collect things that require storage space. The door itself was heavy, solid wood, painted an institutional gray that suggested it had been repainted many times over the years. It was mid-October when I first heard the knocking. I was working late, maybe 1 a.m., when I heard 3 distinct knocks coming from below my office. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. I assumed it was the pipes. Old houses make sounds. Everyone knows that. I went back to my code, dismissed it as nothing. The knocking came again the next night. Same time, same rhythm. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the basement door. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, listening. Nothing. Just silence pressing back at me. I opened the door. The stairs descended into complete darkness, and the smell that came up was wrong. Not mildew or dampness, but something older, something that reminded me of the morgue I visited once for a college anatomy class. Cold and still, and final. I shone my flashlight down the stairs. Concrete steps, clear of debris. Exposed beams visible in the ceiling. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I went down. The basement was larger than I expected, stretching under the entire footprint of the house. Old furniture sat covered in sheets, boxes stacked against the far wall, a water heater humming in the corner. The floor was concrete, recently poured in sections, the color variations obvious even in my flashlight beam. Some areas were smooth and gray, others rough and darker, almost black. I walked the perimeter, checking for any obvious source of the knocking. Pipes looked intact. No animals, no signs of entry. But as I turned to head back upstairs, my light caught something near the far corner, where the newer concrete met the old foundation wall. Scratches. Deep gouges in the concrete, 3 parallel lines, like someone had dragged something heavy across it. Or like someone had tried to claw their way out. I left the basement immediately, locked the door behind me, and convinced myself I was being paranoid. The knocking continued every night for a week. Same time, same pattern. I stopped going to the basement. I called David, told him about the sounds. He came by the next day, went down himself, came back up and said it was definitely the pipes, probably air in the system. He would get a plumber to check it out. He never did. Then the footsteps started. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. to the sound of footsteps climbing the basement stairs. Slow, methodical, the distinct creak of weight on old wood. 1 step, pause. Another step, pause. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering so loud I could barely hear anything else. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Nothing. I got out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I kept in my closet, and went to the basement door. It was standing open. I had locked it before bed, I was certain of it. The darkness beyond the doorway was absolute, heavier than normal darkness, like something thick and alive. I reached for the light switch next to the door. It clicked uselessly. The basement light was out. I stood there for what felt like an hour but was probably only a few minutes. Listening. Waiting. Nothing came up those stairs. Eventually, I closed the door, locked it, and wedged a chair under the handle. I did not sleep that night. The next morning I called David again. This time I was firm. Something was wrong with the basement. The door would not stay locked. I needed him to come fix it immediately. He arrived that afternoon with a padlock, installed it himself on the outside of the door. "Heavy duty," he said. "Nobody gets through that." I found the padlock on the floor 4 days later. It had not been cut or broken. It had been unlocked, the key still in my drawer upstairs where I had left it. The door was open again. That is when I started researching the house. I should have done this before I moved in, but you never think you need to until something forces your hand. I started with property records, then moved to local newspaper archives. I spent 6 hours in the Millbrook Public Library going through old microfiche, searching for any mention of this address. I found it buried in a 27 article, a brief police report about a missing person case that went cold. Daniel Pritchard, 43, reported missing by his brother in March of that year. He had been renting the house at my address, living there alone, unemployed after a recent divorce. His brother stated that Daniel had complained about problems with the landlord, disputes over repairs, and unpaid utilities. Police conducted a search of the property after Daniel was reported missing. They found no signs of foul play, but they did note in their report that the basement had been recently sealed with fresh concrete. The case went cold because there was no evidence. No body. No witnesses. Just a man who vanished, and a basement that had been suspiciously renovated around the same time. I kept digging. There were complaints from neighbors in 2006 about sounds coming from the basement late at night, described as prolonged scraping and banging, starting around midnight and continuing for hours. The complaints stopped after March 2007. I found 3 more disappearances connected to this address over the years, going back to 1982. All tenants. All single men living alone. All disappeared without explanation. The landlord in 1982 was David Harmon's father, Gerald Harmon. The property had stayed in the family. I called the police. I told them everything, the knocking, the footsteps, the unlocking door, the research I had done. They sent an officer who took my statement and promised they would look into it. He seemed skeptical, but professional. He went to the basement door, tried the padlock I had replaced, asked if I had been under any unusual stress lately. I told him no. He left. That night, the voice started. I was lying in bed, not quite asleep, but drifting, when I heard it. Low, rumbling, coming from directly below my bedroom. Not words at first, just a sound that resonated through the floor and into my bones. Then it formed into something recognizable. "Let me out." 3 words, repeated over and over, the same rhythm as the knocking had been. "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out." I called 911. I told them someone was trapped in my basement. They arrived within 10 minutes, 2 officers, the same one from earlier and a female partner. They went down to the basement with flashlights and crowbars, spent 20 minutes down there while I waited upstairs, shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. They found nothing. No one. No signs anyone had been down there. They checked the concrete, knocked on the walls, looked for hollow spaces. They told me the basement was completely empty, completely secure. They suggested I might want to speak to someone, maybe take a few days away from the house. "Stress can do strange things to perception," one of them said. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was losing it, working too much, isolated too long. Maybe the research had poisoned my imagination, and I was creating connections that did not exist. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should not have called them. You should not have looked." I stared at it for several seconds before I noticed the next message coming through. The concrete is thin in some places. I can feel you walking above me. I know which room you sleep in. Another message. I have been here longer than you think. I have been patient. But now you know, and that changes things. I blocked the number. 3 more texts came through from a different number. Then another. Then another. All saying variations of the same thing. They knew I had figured it out. They knew where I was. They knew how to reach me. I grabbed my car keys and walked out the front door. I drove to a motel 30 miles away, checked in, and sat on the bed with every light on. I did not go back to the house for 3 days. When I finally returned with my brother and 2 friends, planning to move my things out, we found the basement door nailed shut from the outside. 8-inch nails driven through the frame into the door itself, dozens of them, creating a lattice of wood and metal. None of us had done that. David Harmon claimed he had not been to the property. I moved out that day. I took my essential belongings and left the rest. I broke my lease, lost my security deposit, did not care. I contacted a lawyer, reported everything to the police again, including the threatening texts. They opened an investigation into David Harmon and the property. 3 months later, they brought in cadaver dogs. The dogs alerted in the basement, in the far corner where I had seen the scratches in the concrete. They excavated. They found remains. Multiple sets of remains, buried under different layers of concrete poured over the course of 4 decades. They identified 3 victims. Daniel Pritchard was one of them. The others had been missing since the 1990s. David Harmon was arrested. He confessed to 2 of the murders, claimed the 3rd was his father's work. He said the tenants had threatened him, had discovered structural issues that would have required expensive repairs, had planned to report him for code violations. He killed them in the basement, sealed them under fresh concrete, and rented the house again. The cycle repeated. He is in prison now, awaiting trial. The house has been condemned, will likely be demolished. I have moved to a different state, a different apartment, a different life. But I still hear it sometimes, late at night when I am alone. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere below me. And I know, even now, that some doors are not supposed to open. Some basements should never be disturbed. Because once you know what is down there, once you hear the voices and feel the presence, you can never truly leave it behind. I am sharing this because people need to understand something about rentals, about old houses, about landlords who discourage you from exploring every part of your own home. If someone tells you to stay out of the basement, if they seal doors and make excuses, if neighbors mention sounds that stopped years ago, you need to ask why. You need to look. You need to know what you were living above. Because I lived above a graveyard for 4 months, and I had no idea. The concrete was thin in places. If I had stayed longer, if I had kept asking questions, I might have ended up under a new layer myself. Another tenant who asked too many questions. Another set of bones waiting to be discovered decades later. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If a basement door will not stay shut, there is a reason. If you hear knocking from below, do not ignore it. Someone might be trying to tell you something. Someone who has been waiting a very long time to be heard. The police told me I was lucky. Most people who noticed what I noticed did not make it out. Most people who heard what I heard never got to report it. David Harmon was methodical, patient, careful. He waited until tenants were isolated, until they had no family checking on them regularly, until their disappearance could be explained away as them moving on, starting over, leaving town. I think about Daniel Pritchard sometimes. I think about him down there in the dark, scratching at the concrete, knowing no one would find him. I think about the others, nameless for years, forgotten except as missing person reports filed away in dusty cabinets. I think about the new concrete I saw when I first went down there, dark and rough, covering something no one was meant to find. I think about the texts that kept coming, even after I moved out, even after Harmon was arrested. Messages from numbers that do not exist, sent at 3:14 a.m., the same time the footsteps climbed the stairs. Messages that say simple things. I am still here. You left without helping. The door is open again. I do not know what to believe anymore. I do not know if I was haunted by the dead or manipulated by the living. I do not know if those voices were real or if my mind created them from the evidence I found. But I know this. That house still stands, empty and condemned. And every night at 3:14 a.m., someone reports hearing knocking from the basement. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Over and over and over. And every night, someone still texts me. Unknown numbers. Unknown senders. Same message. Let me out. I never respond. I never will. Because I learned something important in that house, something the police could not explain, and the investigation could not answer. Some doors are locked for a reason. Some basements are sealed not to hide a crime, but to keep something contained. And when you break that seal, when you open that door, when you shine a light into darkness that has existed for decades, you do not always understand what you are releasing until it is far too late. I survived. The others did not. And I carry that with me every single day. Every night at 3:14 a.m., I am awake. I am listening. I am remembering. The basement door will not stay shut, even now, even hundreds of miles away. Some doors exist in your mind, carved there by trauma and terror, and they swing open whether you want them to or not. And when they do, you hear it all again. The knocking, the footsteps, the voice. Let me out. I cannot. I am sorry, but I cannot. This happened in the fall of 2021 when I was living alone in a rented townhouse in southern Illinois. It was my first time ever living by myself. And even though I was technically an adult, 27, with a full-time job and a stable routine, I still had a lot of nerves about the idea. I had just gone through a rough breakup, and I thought the silence and solitude might help me process everything. The townhouse was part of a small row of identical units, kind of plain but clean and quiet, tucked away in a sleepy cul-de-sac just off a rural highway. The neighborhood had that sterile suburban vibe. Lots of beige vinyl siding, trimmed hedges, wind chimes, and mailboxes with family names stenciled on them. Mostly older folks, but a few young families. I did not know any of my neighbors well, but I liked it that way. I kept to myself, but almost right away, I noticed one person who stood out from the rest. He lived 3 doors down. A tall, heavy-set man, probably in his mid-40s with a scruffy beard and a weird habit of standing outside his house at night. Sometimes just pacing or smoking. Sometimes doing nothing at all. Just staring. I would pull into my driveway after work around 9 or 10 p.m. and there he would be, leaning against his porch rail or just standing at the edge of his driveway facing the street. He never waved, never smiled. He just stared, even if I looked directly at him. I tried to ignore it. A couple of times I mentioned it to friends or my mom, and they said maybe he was just a night owl or had insomnia. But there was something unsettling about him. Like he was always watching, but never participating. It was not just that he was there. It was the stillness. He did not fidget, or check his phone, or shift his weight. He just stood there, like a statue. I told myself not to be paranoid, but the more time passed, the more that gnawing feeling in my gut grew. Then the noises started. It was around mid-September when I first heard it. I had just gotten home from work after a long shift. I worked late hours managing inventory at a distribution center, and I usually got in around 10:30 p.m., exhausted, grabbing a bite to eat, and crashing. That night, I fell asleep around midnight. At exactly 2:37 a.m., I woke up to a sound I can only describe as metal scraping against wood. At first, I thought I had dreamed it, but then I heard it again. A long, slow creaking noise, like an old gate opening. My bedroom was on the first floor at the back of the unit, and I had a sliding glass door with vertical blinds that led to a small fenced-in backyard. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and listened. There was a pause. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, crunching sounds, like someone walking slowly across gravel. My entire backyard was lined with decorative rock instead of grass, so you could hear every footstep clearly. These were not animal sounds. I grabbed my phone and crept out of bed. I did not have a weapon, just a dull kitchen knife I kept in my nightstand just in case, which at the time felt kind of ridiculous. I crouched by the edge of the window and peeked through the blinds. I could not see anything. The motion light was not on, which meant either they were out of range or had come in a different way. I dialed 911. The dispatcher was calm, asked for my address, and told me officers were en route. I stayed crouched in the dark, barely breathing. About 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flickered through my front window. I got up, opened the door, and met the two officers outside. I explained everything, what I heard, what time it started. One of them walked around the back while the other stayed with me and asked a few questions. The officer in the yard came back and said the gate was closed, and there were no signs of tampering, but said he would write up a report just in case. They did not see anyone. No footprints or damage. Basically, no crime. One of them actually said, "Probably just a raccoon," and gave me a look that clearly said, "You are wasting our time." I did not argue. They left after about 10 minutes. I did not sleep the rest of that night. The next morning I went outside to check the backyard myself. That is when I noticed something strange. There was a flat stone about the size of a paperback book wedged under the bottom edge of the wooden fence gate. I had not noticed it before. The gate had a heavy spring that made it swing closed automatically, but the stone looked like it had been placed there specifically to stop it from closing all the way. It was subtle, like something someone would do if they wanted to come back later and slip in without making noise. I picked up the rock and tossed it across the yard. I called the police again and told them what I had found. They told me they would note it in the report, but again said there was not much they could do. I asked if they could talk to any of the neighbors or check for cameras. They said no, unless a crime was committed, they could not investigate. I felt like I was losing my mind. 2 nights later it escalated. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke up again, this time to the sound of my back door handle turning. The handle rattled gently at first, like someone testing it, then a harder jiggle, like someone trying to open it. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. I could not see anything through the blinds, but I could feel someone standing on the other side. My mouth went dry. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called the police again. While I waited, I crouched in the hallway out of view. I did not have a gun or dog, just that stupid kitchen knife. My motion light clicked on, and through a tiny gap in the blinds, I saw a shadow move across the window. It was a man. He did not run or try to hide. He just stood there. The same 2 officers showed up again. This time they actually found footprints in the gravel. Big ones, heading right up to the door. But again they said since no entry had been made, there was not enough to go on. They promised to patrol the area more often and told me to keep my doors locked. The next day, I installed the camera. It was one of those mid-range Wi-Fi security cams. I set one up above the back door and another above the front porch. That night, I did not go to bed. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the live feed on my phone. 2:14 a.m. came and went. Nothing happened. Then at 2:23, the back camera triggered. A man stepped into frame. He walked in through the gate like he knew exactly how to move to avoid the motion sensor until the last second. He was tall and broad, wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, jeans and gloves. He walked up to the door, looked up directly at the camera, and smiled. A slow, stretched-out grin. Then he backed up, still staring, and disappeared into the dark. I called the police again, and they came back, watched the clip, and admitted that yes, it was unsettling. But since he did not break in, did not damage property, and did not appear to be armed, there was still allegedly nothing they could do. They would not even ask the guy down the street to check his doorbell cam. I begged them. They said their hands were tied. That night, I packed a bag and slept at a hotel. When I came back the next day, I found 4 muddy handprints on the glass door. 2 high up and 2 low, like someone had crouched down and just rested their hands there for a while, staring in. I moved out a week later. I broke my lease and forfeited my deposit. I did not care. I could not stay there another night. The final straw was the note I found wedged in my mailbox the day I left. It was handwritten in small, cramped letters on lined notebook paper. It said, "The cops leave, but I don't." I filed one last report. The officer I spoke to that time looked genuinely disturbed by the note. He promised they would do a wellness check on the neighborhood, but it was too late. I never went back. About a month later, I got a message on Facebook from a girl named Kayla. She said she was the new tenant who had moved into the unit after me. Her message said, "Hi, sorry to bother you. I think you used to live here. Did you ever have someone in a black hoodie hanging around the backyard? I keep hearing footsteps at night, and last night someone knocked on the glass door around 2 a.m. and just stood there." I did not reply. I did not want to know what happened next. Tonight, we explore what happens when a family shares something that should not be possible to share. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what is the current time there. Now, let me tell you about what happened to me in 2010, and why I will never step foot in that house again. I was 26 years old when my husband and I moved in with his grandparents temporarily. We were between apartments, saving money, trying to get our lives in order. It was supposed to be 3 weeks. It turned into 6 of the worst weeks of my life. The house itself was not remarkable. A 2-story colonial in rural Pennsylvania, the kind you see in every small town across America. White siding, black shutters, a front porch that wrapped around the side. His grandparents, Gerald and Maureen, were in their late 70s, quiet people who kept to themselves. They gave us the upstairs guest room, a space that had not been used in years. The moment I walked into that room, I felt wrong. I know how that sounds. I know people say things like that all the time in stories like this, but I need you to understand. I'm not the type of person who believes in haunted houses or evil spirits. I have a degree in biology. I work in a laboratory. I approach life with logic and reason. But that room made my skin crawl from the very first moment. The bed faced the doorway, and there was a small window on the opposite wall that looked out over the backyard. The walls were painted a faded yellow, and there were old family photographs in mismatched frames on the dresser. Everything smelled like dust and lavender sachets. Nothing about it should have been frightening, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. My husband, Daniel, did not feel it. Not at first. He would fall asleep within minutes of lying down, and I would stay awake, staring at the doorway, convinced that someone was standing just beyond it in the hallway. I never saw anyone. I just felt the presence of someone there, waiting. The first week passed in a fog of sleepless nights and mounting anxiety. I told myself it was stress. We had been fighting more than usual, the strain of living with his grandparents creating tension neither of us acknowledged directly. His grandmother, Maureen, had made a few pointed comments about my housekeeping, about how I folded towels incorrectly, about how I should be thinking about giving her great-grandchildren soon. Small things. Passive-aggressive things. The kind of comments that burrow under your skin and fester. Then the dreams started. The first time, I woke at 3:17 in the morning from a dream about a white dinner plate spinning on a table. Just spinning and spinning, faster and faster until the sound of it became unbearable, a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. I sat up, my heart pounding, and turned to Daniel. He was already awake, staring at the ceiling. Without looking at me, he said, "The spinning plate." I went cold. We looked at each other in the darkness, and I saw fear in his eyes that mirrored my own. We had both dreamed the same thing. The exact same thing. A white dinner plate, spinning on a dark wood table, the sound of it growing louder and louder until we could not stand it anymore. We tried to laugh it off. Coincidence. We had probably both seen a plate in the kitchen earlier that day, our brains recycling the same mundane image. But neither of us went back to sleep that night. We lay there in silence, listening to the house settle around us, and I kept my eyes fixed on the doorway, watching for movement that never came. The following night, it happened again. The same dream. The spinning plate. This time, when I woke, Daniel was already sitting up, his face pale in the moonlight coming through the window. He was shaking. "Something is wrong with this room," he whispered. "I do not know what it is, but something is very wrong." I wanted to pack our things right then and leave. But where would we go? We had no money saved yet. No other family nearby. And how do you explain to your elderly grandparents that their guest room feels evil? You do not. So we stayed. That was when the bed started shaking. The first time, I thought it was an earthquake. The whole bed vibrated violently, the headboard rattling against the wall with a sound like bones breaking. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Daniel grabbed my hand, and we both froze, waiting for it to happen again. It did not. Not that night. But it did the next night, and the night after that. Always around 3 in the morning. Always violent enough to wake us both. We would lie there afterward, holding hands in the darkness, neither of us speaking, both of us knowing that something was terribly wrong but unable to name what it was. I started noticing other things. The staircase that led down from our room to the main floor felt different at night. During the day, it was just a staircase. But after dark, walking down those stairs required every ounce of courage I had. The dread was physical, a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I would stand at the top of the stairs, my hand on the railing, and I would have to force myself to take that first step. Every time I did, I had the overwhelming sensation that if I turned around, I would see someone standing at the top of the stairs behind me. I never turned around. I could not. The breaking point came 2 weeks in, after a particularly awful dinner with the family. Daniel's uncle had come to visit, and he had made some comment about Daniel needing to find a better job, implying that I was holding him back, that I was too ambitious, too focused on my own career. Maureen had nodded along, agreeing. Daniel had said nothing to defend me. Nothing. I excused myself and went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed, angry and hurt and exhausted, and I felt the weight of everything crashing down on me at once. The sleepless nights, the constant tension, the feeling of being watched, the dreams, the shaking bed. I wanted to scream, but I just sat there, staring at the wall, trying not to cry. That night, I was attacked. I cannot describe it any other way. Attacked. I had fallen asleep, despite myself, emotionally drained, and I woke to a sensation I will never forget. It felt like someone had grabbed me, not physically, but deeper than that, something invasive and wrong. It started at the base of my skull, a pressure that radiated down my spine like an electric current. Then came the thoughts. They were not my thoughts. I know that sounds insane, but I know my own mind, and these were not mine. They were intrusive, violent, full of rage and self-hatred. Images flashed through my head, horrible things, thoughts about hurting myself, hurting Daniel, hurting the baby we did not even have yet. I could feel something pushing these thoughts into me, forcing them through my consciousness like poison through a vein. I fought it. I do not know how else to describe what I did. I closed my eyes, and I forced myself to think of other things. Happy memories. My mother's face. The smell of rain. Anything pure and good. I prayed, even though I had not prayed since I was a child. I repeated the Lord's Prayer over and over, anything to drown out the intrusive thoughts, to push back against whatever was inside my head. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. Eventually, the pressure released. The thoughts stopped. I was left gasping, drenched in sweat, my whole body trembling. Daniel was asleep beside me, undisturbed. Whatever had attacked me, it had been for me alone. I did not sleep the rest of the night. I sat in bed, my back against the headboard, watching the doorway, waiting for something to appear. Nothing did. But I'd feel it there, just beyond my sight, watching me in return. The next morning, I looked like I had been through hell. My eyes were bloodshot, my skin pale. I ached everywhere, as if I had been beaten. Daniel asked me what was wrong, and I told him everything. He believed me. How could he not? He had felt it too, in his own way. The wrongness of that room, the presence that lived there. That afternoon, I called my mother. I needed to hear a rational voice, someone who would tell me I was stressed and overtired and imagining things. Instead, she told me to leave. Immediately. Get out of that house, she said, her voice tight with fear. I do not care where you go. Get out. We made plans to leave at the end of the week. We could stay with Daniel's brother in Philadelphia until we found our own place. Just a few more nights. We could make it a few more nights. On our last night in the house, I saw him. I had gotten up to use the bathroom around 2 a.m. The house was silent, everyone else asleep. I made my way down the hallway, using the moonlight from the window to guide me, and when I came back, I glanced toward the staircase. There was a man standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at me. He was not solid. Not quite. He was dark, a shadow in the shape of a man, but I could make out enough detail to know he was watching me. His eyes, I could see his eyes, even though the rest of him was just darkness. They were filled with hate. Pure, concentrated hatred. I froze. I could not move. Could not scream. Could not do anything but stand there and stare at him. He did not move either. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, and then he simply dissolved, fading into the darkness like smoke. I ran back to the bedroom and woke Daniel. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. He held me, and we stayed awake until sunrise, our bags already packed by the door. We left the next morning without saying goodbye to his grandparents. We just left. For years I tried to convince myself it had all been in my head. Stress-induced hallucinations, maybe. Shared psychotic disorder, a rare condition where two people in close proximity develop the same delusions. I read everything I could find about it. There are documented cases of it happening in families, especially families living in isolation, dealing with high levels of emotional tension. The medical literature calls it folie à deux, madness shared by two. In some cases, researchers believe that extreme stress can create a feedback loop of fear, manifesting in identical hallucinatory experiences between people who are emotionally connected. One study I found described a married couple who experienced simultaneous sleep paralysis episodes, both reporting the sensation of a heavy presence sitting on their chests, both seeing the same shadowy figure at the foot of their bed. The researchers noted that emotional turmoil was a significant triggering factor. Another case involved a mother and daughter isolated together for years, both developing identical paranoid delusions about an intruder in their home. Maybe that was what happened to us. Maybe the stress of living with his grandparents, the tension in our marriage, the lack of sleep, all of it had created the perfect conditions for our minds to break in synchronized ways. Maybe we had fed off each other's fear, amplifying it, creating shared hallucinations that felt real because we both believed in them. That is what I told myself for 3 years. That is what I needed to believe to keep my sanity. Then my daughter saw him. She was 4 years old. We were living in our own house by then, hundreds of miles away from Pennsylvania, and we had never told her anything about what happened in that guest room. She should not have known. But one morning, she came into the kitchen where I was making breakfast and said, "Mommy, who is the man outside my window?" My blood went cold. "What man, sweetie?" "The man who was there last night. He was looking in at me. He said he hates you." I stood there, the spatula in my hand, unable to breathe. Daniel had come into the room, and he had heard it too. We looked at each other, and I saw the same terror in his eyes that I felt. "What did he look like?" Daniel asked her, his voice shaking. She described him. "A dark man," she called him. "Not black, but made of darkness. Just his eyes were clear. And he had smiled at her," she said, "but it was not a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that meant he wanted to hurt someone." We moved her into our bedroom that night. We have not let her sleep alone since. I do not know what was in that guest room. I do not know if it was a malevolent entity, a ghost, a demon, whatever you want to call it, or if it was something our minds created together, a shared psychosis born from stress and fear and isolation. Maybe it does not matter. Maybe the line between those things is thinner than we want to believe. What I do know is this. In 2012, Gerald died of a heart attack in his sleep. The guest room was where they found him. Maureen lived another year before she passed away from what the doctors called failure to thrive, which is what they call it when someone just gives up and dies. The house was sold, torn down by the new owners 6 months later. The land is empty now. Sometimes I drive by it when I visit Daniel's brother in Philadelphia. I pull over on that empty stretch of road and look at where that house used to be. The grass has grown over the foundation. You would never know anything had been there. But I know. And sometimes, late at night, when I cannot sleep, I wonder if it is still there, waiting in the space where that guest room used to be. Waiting for someone else to stay just a little too long. Waiting to crawl inside their head and whisper terrible things. I wonder if there are others like us, people who have stayed in rooms like that and felt what we felt. People who woke at 3 a.m. to a bed, shaking violently, and a presence in the doorway, and thoughts that were not their own. I wonder how many of them made it out. And I wonder how many did not. If you are reading this, and you have ever felt what I felt, please trust your instincts. If a room feels wrong, leave. If you start having dreams that someone else is having too, leave. If you feel something pushing thoughts into your head that are not yours, get out. Run. Do not try to rationalize it. Do not wait to see if it gets better, because it will not get better. It will only get worse. I survived. My husband survived. But I think about that guest room every single day. I think about the man at the bottom of the stairs. I think about my daughter's words. He said he hates you. Whatever was in that room, it is not done with us. I know that now. It followed us. Or maybe it was never in the room at all. Maybe it was always inside us, waiting for the right conditions to emerge, fed by stress and fear and the darkness we carry within ourselves. I do not know which possibility terrifies me more. All I know is that I will never go back to Pennsylvania. And I will never ever let my daughter sleep alone in a room where I cannot see her. The doctors call it recurrent, isolated sleep paralysis with hypnopompic hallucinations. The psychologists call it shared psychotic disorder. The priests call it demonic oppression. I call it the worst 6 weeks of my life. And I call it unfinished.